The first time I saw it, I told myself it was nothing. There are 1,000 harmless reasons for seeing shapes in smoke. Anyone who's spent time on a fireground knows that. Heat shimmer bends the air, wind shears the edges of things until they blur. Exhaustion teaches your eyes to reach for patterns where there are none. Even fear has a way of sketching outlines and insisting they matter. So when the smoke gathered itself into something that looked briefly like a person, I dismissed it without ceremony. I didn't panic. I didn't stop working. I told myself with the quiet confidence of a man who believes he understands his environment that it was only smoke behaving like smoke does. Only later did I realise that what unsettled me wasn't the shape itself, it was the way it moved. I'd been with the CFA for 12 years by then. Volunteer like most of us. I worked a desk job during the week, coached junior footy on Saturdays when the season allowed, and spent summer evenings half watching the sky like it might speak to me if I listened closely enough. Fire had become a background presence in my life, a seasonal fact like drought or Christmas beetles. At home, my wife understood this in the way partners of volunteers learn to understand things. She never argued when the pager went off, never sighed. She would simply look up from whatever she was doing, meet my eyes and say, "Be smart." Not "be careful," not "don't go." Be smart. It was her way of acknowledging the truth of it, that the danger wasn't abstract, but neither was the duty, that asking me not to go would be like asking the tide not to turn. The burn-off that started everything was unremarkable in almost every way. Late January, the kind of day where the heat sits on your shoulders like a hand. The paddocks around town were the colour of old bone, the grass crisp enough to snap underfoot. The pager went off just as I was wrestling my son into pyjamas. He wriggled and laughed, toothpaste foaming at the corners of his mouth, blissfully unaware of how fragile the world could be. When the pager sounded, the house shifted. My wife went still. I caught her watching me as I pulled on boots and scratched for the old CFA hoodie hanging by the door. She stepped close and brushed away a loose piece of thread, her fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary. "Grass fire?" she asked. "Sounds like it." She nodded, then said it as always. "Be smart." Outside, the air already carried the faintest suggestion of smoke. The fire had started as a burn-off on a neighbouring property and jumped its line when the wind shifted. By the time we arrived, flames were licking along the fence line and pushing into long grass that hadn't been properly grazed in years. Smoke lay low across the paddock, thick and heavy, clinging to the ground like fog. The smell was immediate and invasive. Scorched grass, eucalyptus oil burning off leaves, hot soil. Underneath it all was a sharper note, something synthetic that suggested plastic or rubber. That always bothered me. It meant the fire was consuming things it wasn't meant to. We worked methodically, the way you do when panic would only make things worse. Hoses out, edges blackened, embers stamped. The farmer hovered uselessly, apologising to anyone who would listen, until the captain moved him out of the way, with a look that brooked no argument. I was watching the tree line when I saw it. At first I thought it was a person standing just inside the smoke. Someone too close to the fire, too still. I opened my mouth to shout, already irritated at the thought of another civilian doing something foolish. But then it shifted. It wasn't stepping. It wasn't turning. The shape slid sideways through the smoke, smooth and unhurried, as if the air itself were carrying it. And it moved against the wind, cutting across the current that pushed ash and heat towards us. I felt a small, cold pause inside my chest. Then the smoke thickened, the outline dissolved, and the moment passed. I blinked, shook my head, and returned my attention to the hose. Smoke, I told myself. Just smoke. I forgot about it the way you forget about an odd sound in a familiar house, by choosing to. But later, standing under the shower as grey water pooled briefly around the drain, I found myself thinking about how certain I'd been that the thing had weight, presence, a suggestion of mass, of volume displaced. At the kitchen table, my wife watched me push food around my plate. "You're quiet," she said. "Long day." She accepted that, but her eyes lingered on me longer than usual, That night, when she reached for me in bed, her hand rested on my chest, as if she were listening for something. The next fire was a lightning strike in the state forest. The bush out there always felt different once smoke entered it. Familiar tracks became distorted, trees casting harsher shadows, sound carried strangely, radios crackled louder than necessary, voices overlapping until it was hard to tell who was speaking. We were cutting a containment line when I saw it again, between two stringy barks just beyond the haze. The same tall, narrow outline, the same stillness. This time, when it turned its head, just a fraction, I felt something more unsettling than fear. Recognition, as if whatever it was had already decided that I was something worth noticing. When it vanished, I found my hands trembling slightly on the hose. Mick noticed. "You all right?" he asked. "Thought I saw someone," I said, and hated how thin the words sounded. He frowned, scanning the smoke. "No one's meant to be in there." We both kept working, but after that he gazed into the haze more often than he needed to. Over the following weeks, the sightings became harder to dismiss. The shape never appeared at small fires, never at rubbish piles or quick grass jobs. Only when the smoke grew dense enough to obscure distance and depth, only when the fire was large enough to generate its own wind. I began to understand that it was not appearing in the smoke, it was appearing because of it. At home, my wife noticed the change before I named it myself. She caught me standing at the sink too long, washing soot from hands already clean. One night she asked gently, "Did you see it again?" I didn't ask how she knew. The sawmill fire was the first time the thing intervened. The building had been abandoned for years, a skeleton of rusted machinery and collapsing timber. Teenagers used it as a playground. Someone had lit something they shouldn't have, and by the time we arrived, the fire was fully developed. Black smoke poured from broken windows, thick and oily. The heat pressed against us, even at a distance. We were tasked with protecting the surrounding scrub, rotating crews to avoid exhaustion. I didn't want to look into that smoke, but I did, and there it was, standing in a doorway. The smoke parted around it, curling at its edges as if encountering something solid. The sight struck me with a kind of horrified clarity. Smoke should not behave like that. Smoke is obedient to air, to heat, to chance. The figure raised one arm. It pointed, downward into the wreckage. I followed its gesture before I could stop myself, and saw the pale shape of a human hand beneath fallen pallets. The sound came a moment later, a cough, weak and panicked. I didn't think. Thinking came later, in fragments long after the body had already committed itself. I was running before the decision fully reached my mind, boots striking concrete, the radio lifted to my mouth, almost by reflex. My voice came out louder than I expected, torn raw by heat and smoke. "There's someone inside," I shouted. "Person trapped inside." Mick's head snapped around, his expression sharpened by disbelief. "What?" "I saw a hand." The words felt absurd, even as I said them, too small for what they implied. The captain's voice cut in immediately, barking orders. The radio erupted into noise. Mick caught my arm as I moved past him, fingers closing hard around my sleeve. "We're not going in there without—" "There's a kid," I said, and the certainty in my voice startled me. I hadn't reasoned it out. I hadn't weighed probabilities. I simply knew, and I hated that knowledge for how little it belonged to me. Mick stared at my face as if he were looking for someone else, someone he recognized. Then he swore, sharp and final. "All right, quick look, in and out." We masked up and dropped low. Inside, the shed ceased to be a place. It became a condition. Smoke pressed in from all sides, so thick that the beam of my torch dissolved after a metre, light swallowed almost as soon as it was born. The air tasted chemical, rubbery, wrong, like melted tyres and scorched insulation. Every breath scraped. Burning timber cracked and popped overhead, sharp reports like distant gunfire. Every one a reminder that the structure was falling in pieces, not all at once. We moved on hands and knees, hose line dragging and snagging on debris. Visibility was an idea rather than a reality. Direction came from instinct and memory, and whatever stubborn sense of orientation the body clung to under stress. I followed where the thing had pointed, only now there was nothing there, no shape, no outline, no guidance, just heat, noise, and the animal certainty that time was thinning. The roof groaned. It wasn't loud at first, just a long, low complaint, the sound of weight remembering gravity. Something deep in my chest recoiled, even before Mick shouted, "Up!" We ducked, instincts faster than thought, and a slab of burning debris crashed down where my head had been, showering sparks and ash. If I'd hesitated, if I'd been slower by even a fraction, it would have crushed me outright. For a moment, I froze. The world narrowed to the pounding of my heart, the hiss of the fire, the sudden understanding of how close I'd come to disappearing. Mick's hand clamped onto my shoulder. "Move!" Then a sound cut through the smoke that didn't belong to the fire. A scream, close, high and raw, already breaking. "Help! Please!" We found him wedged behind a stack of pallets, half buried beneath fallen timber. He couldn't have been more than 16. His face was black with soot, eyes wide and shining, the white stark against the dark. He was coughing in great convulsive spasms like he was drowning on dry land. When he saw us, the sound he made collapsed into sobbing. "Please," he choked. "I didn't mean." "Shut up," Mick snapped, not unkindly. "Breathe. Just breathe." I hooked my arms under the boy's shoulders and hauled him free. He was lighter than he should have been, all angles and shaking limbs, underfed or simply burned hollow by fear. And then the fire changed. It found something. The roar deepened, shifting pitch as if the shed had drawn a breath and decided to keep it. Heat surged, sudden and aggressive. The smoke pulled in one direction, no longer drifting, but moving, funneled as if by intention. In the cone of my torch beam, I saw it. Movement where there should have been none. The shape stood ahead of us, half-formed, tall and narrow, an interruption in the smoke rather than a thing within it. It didn't rush us. It didn't reach out. It simply occupied the path we would have taken. The smoke around it thickened, folding inward, as if assembling something more substantial. Mick swore under his breath. The kid screamed again, thrashing weakly in my grip, and understanding struck with a clarity that had nothing to do with reason. It wasn't warning us. It wasn't helping us. It was steering us, watching to see which way we would turn. "Left!" I shouted. Mick didn't hesitate. We pivoted hard, dragging the boy with us. A second later, the space we'd nearly moved into collapsed in a violent cascade, burning pallets and beams tumbling down in a chain reaction, as though the shed itself had sprung a trap. We staggered through the smoke, half carrying, half dragging the kid. My boots caught on debris. One glove slipped, the hose snagged again, yanking tight. For a moment, we were stuck. The boy's eyes locked onto mine, huge with panic, his mouth opening to scream again. And behind us, close enough to feel, I sensed it. It wasn't touching us. It wasn't rushing. Just present, like something standing inches from the back of my neck, confident enough not to hurry. Patient, certain, as if it knew the building would finish the job eventually. Mick wrenched the hose free, and we broke into open air, bursting from the shed like something expelled rather than escaped. The boy collapsed immediately, retching black soot onto the ground. Ambulance crews surged forward, voices urgent, hands everywhere. The world rushed back in all at once. The captain was there in seconds, his face tight with anger and something sharper beneath it. "What the hell were you thinking?" he demanded. I couldn't tell him the truth, so I said, "There was someone in there." He looked at the boy then, at the way his chest heaved, and something in his expression eased, just slightly. Then he turned back to me, and in his eyes I saw not anger, but recognition, like he had seen this exact moment unfold before. He clapped my shoulder hard. "Good work," he said, then quietly, so only I could hear, "Don't do it again." The boy survived. Later we heard the usual explanations. Just mucking around. Thought it'd be funny. Thought it would make a good video. Nearly died for it. And me? I went home shaking. Not from adrenaline, not from fear of fire, but from the growing certainty that something had been playing with us, because it had shown me where the boy was, and then tried to kill us when we went to get him. Not evil, not kind, just attentive, curious, hungry, like something that had learned what we were willing to risk and was eager to see how far that willingness could be stretched. After that, I could no longer pretend the thing was benevolent. It didn't warn, it guided. It behaved less like a guardian and more like a hand on the small of your back, steering you towards something you had not chosen. A senior firefighter named Robbo said something to me one night in the station tea room, his voice low enough that the walls wouldn't hear. "If it points," he said, stirring the tea, "don't look where it's pointing." The captain confirmed it later in the quiet way men share things they do not want spoken aloud. "It's not there to help you," he said. "It's there to distract you, to put you at risk." The sentence didn't sound like superstition. It sounded like experience. The captain straightened. "You see a shape," he said. "You ignore it. You understand?" I whispered, "You've seen it too." The captain held my eyes for a long moment, then said, "Everyone who stays long enough does." I should have resigned then. I felt it even at the time, that quiet internal click when a decision had already been made, somewhere deeper than language. But resignation carries a particular weight out here. It feels less like self-preservation and more like abandonment, like dropping a rope because your arms are tired, knowing someone else might still need to climb. So I stayed, and staying, I would learn, was the mistake. A few weeks later, we were called to a job big enough to draw in half the district. Multiple brigades, wind that refused to settle, heat so fierce it blistered paint and softened road signs, houses at risk, which meant people at risk, which meant nobody was going home early. We staged at a reserve choked with trucks and flashing lights. Radios screamed over one another. Crews moved with the frantic coordination of insects disturbed from a nest. Purposeful, fast, fragile. The fire had teeth by then. It wasn't just advancing, it was choosing targets, pushing through bushland towards the back fences of properties, testing lines, probing for weakness. And at that stage, a fire stops feeling like weather and starts feeling like intent. We went in hard. Hours passed without shape or structure, just heat and motion and noise. Spot fires sprang up like involuntary reactions, the ground itself coughing embers into existence. At some point, night fell, but the sky stayed orange, thick with reflected flame. I was working a hose line near a corrugated shed when I felt it before I saw it, that familiar pressure at the base of my skull, like a thought you haven't had yet. The shape stood across the driveway, not emerging from the smoke so much as interrupting it, standing where there should have been nothing but drifting ash and darkness, closer than it had ever been, tall, narrow, composed entirely of absence. It leaned forward slightly, almost inquisitively, as though listening for something only it could hear. Then it raised an arm and pointed, not towards the fire, towards a side gate, a narrow passage between two sheds, barely wide enough for a person with a hose line. Smoke was being funneled through it, compressed, moving with unsettling speed. My body started forward before my mind caught up. 1 foot, then another, hose dragging behind me. The sensation was not panic, not urgency, just compliance, like stepping forward when something opens a door and gestures you through. Mick's voice cut across the noise. "Where are you going?" The word stalled. "I don't know." The shape didn't move. It simply waited, pointing, patient. And in that suspended moment, something finally aligned in my mind. The danger was not that it would push me into fire. The danger was that it didn't need to. I stopped. The sensation was physical, abrupt, like walking into an invisible wall. My boots scraped concrete as I froze mid-step. Mick jogged up behind me, breath loud in his mask. "Mate, what are you doing?" I stared into the gap between the sheds. The smoke there was different, denser, darker, dragged low as if weighted. As it shifted, the beam of my torch caught something that made my stomach drop. A power line. Downed and live, swaying slightly where it lay, coiled across the dirt, spitting white-blue sparks into the smoke. Each contact sent a sharp crack through the air, brief flashes lighting the space in violent pulses. Beyond it, half buried in debris, a yellow gas pipe jutted from the ground, fractured, hissing softly like a living thing. Invisible vapour bled into the passage, feeding the smoke, waiting for ignition. A perfect funnel, a corridor of death. If I'd taken 2 more steps, the hose would have dragged across the line. If I tried to step over it, my boots would have bridged the gap. If the gas had caught, there wouldn't have been time for fear, just error, just absence. I took a step back, legs shaking hard enough that I had to brace myself against the shed wall. The smoke shifted, the sparks died down, and the shape was gone. Mick followed my gaze, swore sharply, and reached for his radio. "Jesus Christ, that was live!" I nodded, but I wasn't really listening, because I understood now. It hadn't been pointing out danger, it hadn't been warning me, it had been pointing me out, marking me, seeing if I would follow. That night, I resigned. I'd hoped that leaving would end it, that once the pager fell silence and the seasons turned without me, whatever had been watching from the smoke would lose interest, that it belonged to the fireground in the same way heat and danger did, and that by stepping away I could step out of its reach. But I was wrong. The last time I saw it was not at a fire. It was winter, one of those slow, cold nights when the house seems to fold in on itself, every sound muffled by carpet and closed doors. The children were asleep, their breathing steady and untroubled. My wife had gone into the shower, the bathroom filling with steam, the faint rush of water moving through the pipes like distant rain. I was in the kitchen, alone, waiting for the toast to pop. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet end of an ordinary day, the hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking over the sink, the small domestic patience of it all. The toaster popped unevenly, one side darker than the other. A thin ribbon of smoke curled upward, lazy and pale, carrying the faint, bitter smell of singed bread. I reached for a tea towel to wave it away, and in that narrow thread of smoke, so slight it barely existed, I felt it, a presence. The smoke did not rise the way it should have. It hesitated, bent, drew itself together, as if the air had learned a new rule. For a moment the suggestion of shoulders emerged, a narrowing where a head might be, not fully there, never fully there, but close enough to make my breath stall. I stood very still. The house held its breath with me. The smoke leaned just slightly in my direction, attentive. In the dark glass of the hallway mirror, behind my own reflection, I saw a deeper absence take shape, taller than the doorway would allow, elongated, patient. It didn't touch the walls. It didn't distort the room. It simply occupied it, watching. It wasn't threatening me. It wasn't curious. It was certain. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I didn't even blink, afraid that if I did, it would finish assembling itself. Then the smoke thinned, the outline softened, the toaster clicked off, and the kitchen returned to itself, the ordinary harmless geometry of cupboards and tiles. When my wife came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, I was standing in the same place, the toast cold on the bench. She asked if I was all right. I told her yes, and it was mostly true, because the worst part wasn't that it had followed me home. It was the realization that it never needed to. It had always been waiting, as patient as summer.